client wants you to put up the attendance code.
Oh, yeah. And we're just doing that in here, right? Did he put the actual, he
It's
didn't
an
start
important.
one? He didn't start one, though, did he?
Did, maybe, yeah, I mean,
Where did he put the code as?
well, you have to put it on the slides. Or just put it as,
I'll just put it in the Discord, honestly. Tell them to look at it in the Discord so they can't, I don't know. Just post it in importance.
no, just open up Notepad here and put it on the screen.
You want to do it in this?
Okay.
Those plus plus, but yeah, let's use that one.
Oh,
Plan for a list section. Oh, what is the code though?
mustard 27.
27?
Yeah, say attendance in CTF dash B.
What is this font?
Comic Sans.
Why is it so big?
Just control shift minus. Or control minus.
No.
No, or control and then scroll down. There you
There we go. Okay, attendance and eCTF magazine. Okay, did you start it?
And just put it on.
Yes. Okay.
And then I would screen share this because,
Oh, they can't see it, huh?
yeah, share the entire one there. Yeah.
I think it's already set to that, no?
Nope.
Yeah.
Well, it's showing here, but you're not screen sharing. No, wait, no, you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is, it is.
I didn't see the green part.
Yeah, it's, okay, that should be good.
Where? Did you sign in?
You need to verify my account.
No, you moved database.
Why did I move databases?
Um,
Okay, I can't do that right now.
I switched from Influx to Mongo. I didn't feel it vibrating like the 7.
Attendance code is on the screen there. So in eCTF main, just do the attendance thing with that code. We'll get started in just a minute.
What's the command?
I think you just click on, you should be able to just click on sign in or whatever. There's a button, if in eCTF main, there should be a button to like enter the code. Yeah. And same with those on Zoom. You guys can see this, right? Just to make sure. You can see the attendance code.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Give everyone a minute to do that.
Yeah. It makes sense.
How do you do the verification thing for sign in? Should I just like do the slash verify on the main, or how does it work?
You said verification for the attendance?
Yeah. For some reason, I'm having like invalid verification. For some reason, I don't know why.
Can you ping X and ask him just in the chat in the Discord channel?
Can you sign into the authentication thing? Are you using your CSE email?
Yeah, I'm using my UCSC one.
Send me a screenshot of what you're seeing. Mustard. Are you signed in?
No, because I'm not logged in on this phone.
Sign in. Later.
I have to verify, and I'm like not even logged. Actually, maybe I can just do that right now.
Eric, do any new messages?
Mm-mm,
Okay.
not yet.
Maybe he's keeping it secret.
I'm assuming they won't reply until like after the weekend.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think, yeah, they don't think they're doing anything today. Authentication failed. Scam. Never mind, it worked.
Wow. What? Now I could finally do. Wow, you signed into the previous meeting.
What?
Because the last CCDC thing, you didn't sign in because you weren't verified.
I never verified.
Well,
Okay.
up to you.
All right, has everyone signed in on Discord? So in eCTF main channel, there is a bot message that has a button that says sign in. So you just click that. It's not doing anything? I can only that. You might want to scroll down. It might have, it will send you a message like that only you can see below if you scroll down. If you're not, are you seeing it? Okay. The code is on the screen, but I'm gonna take it down in just a minute. So I'll give everyone like one more minute. Okay, is everyone signed in? Is anyone not signed in for attendance? Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started then. So welcome everyone. This is our first all hands meeting. So the first meeting of the year for eCTF 2026. And the first thing I'm gonna have everyone do right now is, oops, that is not the right thing, is register with MITRE because you need to fill out the individual registration form to actually be on the team. So I'm going to announce this right now on the Discord channel, on the important channel. So everyone, please fill this out. It's pretty short. For the team ID, make sure you select UCSC 2, not UCSC 1. That's a different team. So do not pick that one. Let me post this right now. Okay. So just fill that out right now. I'll give everyone a minute or two. It's pretty short.
Wait, we use UCSC too, right?
UCSC 2.
All right, thanks.
Mhm. I'm not saying I'm not a Hello, welcome. So we're doing registration right now. The attendance code is mustard 27. So in the eCTF main channel, just click sign in and then type that in. Yeah, and then you're all set. I'll give everyone like a few minutes to do this. It's gonna be fine. I think it needs to be on. Wait, that buys, this way.
There are lawyers there and they get access to your individual registration. And so essentially, if we do really good on the competition, and then you talk to an employer, then you put that you're a freshman, they might not be interested in you as much. So. No, not my like. No. The professor, but we don't give you independent study credit for this. Great. This guy's an expert on both. Give me into, I think that. What? Yeah, and
Okay, has everyone filled out that form? Has anyone not filled it out yet, or is still working on it? Okay. I'll give like a couple more minutes then, and then we'll get started. Okay, so everyone done filling out the form? No one's still filling it out, right? People on Zoom too? Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started then. So now that you guys have completed that, we're just gonna talk a little bit about these meetings going forward. So this is our like all hands meeting. So everyone in the entire team, all 20 of us are gonna be here every Saturday, ideally in person. If you can't make it in person, that's fine. You can come on Zoom. We always will have Zoom as an option, but try to make these meetings, even if you have to be on Zoom, like these meetings are pretty important because it allows for all of us to meet together and talk and work together on things. And just get a status check on, everyone's progress on things. So please try to make these meetings as much as you can, preferably in person. I think it's better if people are in person. So just a quick note, these meetings will be held in Baskin Engineering 2, room 506 going forward. So this room is just for today because we couldn't get that room for today. You won't have to like come down to the basement every Saturday. The agenda for all the meetings is going to follow these 4 things. The first thing at the start of every all hands meeting is we're going to do a team status where every single sub team will go over all their progress on what they're working on, things that they're stuck on, things they need help on. And we'll also allow it for people to ask questions or concerns about things they're working on. This way we can all kind of get an idea of what everyone is doing and we can just keep track of our progress on things. We're also going to be assigning tasks every meeting. So say we have a new feature we need to implement in our design, we will find a team that has like, free time or has people who aren't doing much. We can assign tasks to them. We can also reassign tasks that are on a team that is already too busy and they can't work or finish a task. We can reassign it to another sub team. We'll talk about sub teams in just a minute. We will also reserve Saturdays, our all hands meetings for any kind of mini workshops that we want to have. So we're going to have a small one today. In the future, we may have some that involve like working with the hardware, using various equipment. And if you have any like suggestions on mini workshops you would like to see, let me know or let one of us know, and we'll be more than happy to set one up. And then the rest of the Saturdays is just going to be collaboration time. So for all of us to be here in one room, it makes it a lot easier for us to collaborate. So that's what the primary time we're going to be using in these meetings is for collaboration. And if there's any questions, by the way, just raise your hand, let me know. So these are the most important dates that you guys should keep in mind right now. The competition starts Wednesday. So we have like 3 days or 4 days until the competition starts. MITRE on that day, on I believe noon Eastern Standard Time or 9 a.m. our time, they're basically gonna release the specifications for the project that we're implementing. So ideally we start development like as soon as we can. That's why we're going to have a meeting on Wednesday. It'll likely be online though, so don't worry about like trying to make it in person. But we're going to go over the specifications. The first thing I'm going to do that morning is literally read through the specifications that they release. And we'll talk about how we want to break up our sub teams based on the design that we need to implement. February 25th is when MITRE opens up submissions. So we can submit our design to them and then other teams can start attacking it. And then we can also start attacking other teams. This is an important date because this is basically our deadline for our project. We need to implement the entirety of our code, ideally as soon as possible by this date. Within a few days after is okay as well, but we don't want to spend like, days or weeks after this because then we lose time on attacks because we're not allowed to attack until we submit. So the sooner we submit, the sooner we start attacking. So this is basically going to give us a target of 6 weeks to design and implement our implementation for the specifications. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. And then after basically April 15th is when the scoreboard closes. So that's like the end of the attack phase. So From February 25th to April 15th, we can attack as much as we want. But after that, it closes. So if we submit late, then we have whatever time we have left up until April 15th to attack. Subteams. So there's a lot of people here. There's like 20 people in our team. It's going to be beneficial for us to break up into smaller subteams, focusing on different things. And I'll be able to give everyone the ability to choose what team they want to be on. In general, we don't know right now what teams we're going to have because it depends on the specifications on what we're building. So there may be more development teams than attack teams or vice versa. It depends. But in general, we're going to have two different categories of subteams. We're going to have development teams that are focused on actually designing and implementing our project. And then we're going to have attack teams that are focused on trying to attack the insecure example that MITRE provides, which is like a reference implementation, and as well as like doing hardware attacks and then trying to audit our own design and find any flaws in it. So these two different categories are very different, have very different workflows and workloads. The attack team is going to be a lot less of a workload right now for the next 6 weeks because we're not doing as much attacks during the development phase. But once we shift into the attack phase, the attack teams are going to be ramping up a lot and using the stuff that they've learned over the 6 weeks and start attacking a lot of the other teams. And then vice versa, the development teams are focusing and ramping up right now, over the next 6 weeks. And then afterwards, they will kind of shift into helping the attack teams with attacks and automating things. Are there any questions on this? Now, what I will say is right now, have in mind what kind of work like you want to do in this project. Like if you want to do more attack stuff, just keep that in mind because you're going to want to tell us that when we go and do actual team assignments so that you can get you on an attack team. And likewise, if you want to get on a development team, just let us know. If you want to, you could tell me like on Discord, just DM me if you prefer to be on like a development or attack team, and then we'll figure that out on Wednesday once we learn all the specifications. Likely, given that we have like 20 people on our team, we're probably going to break up into like 4 or more teams, 4 more sub-teams, depending on the actual design requirements. If there are like multiple components to our design this year, we may have a separate team for each components, and then we'll have like 1 or 2 attack teams depending on the different kinds of attacks that we are doing. Okay, are there any questions so far about that? Okay, so just keep in mind what you are interested in doing for this competition because those are 2 very different things. And of course, if you pick on one team, you can always potentially bounce around and look and do other things too if you want to do a little bit of development. But ideally, we would like you to stay like in one team the whole time, so it's easier for you to manage your time and it's easier for us to manage who's working on what. But we will probably have a little bit of flexibility with that. Okay, so that's kind of the rundown for the competition because we still don't really know much about the competition yet until Wednesday. So the remainder of this time is going to be a mini crash course on cryptography because it's a very important topic in this competition. We're going to do that. Afterwards, I'll talk a little bit about last year's specifications and just kind of go through what we had to do just to give you guys a better idea of like what this competition actually entails. And then after that, Max is going to have a little mini workshop as well on hardware attacks using the chip whisperer. So that'll also be pretty cool. Does anyone have any questions about the competition before we start on this? Okay. So we'll go ahead and start on the cryptography part now. So just raise your hands, just curious. Who is already familiar with cryptography, has taken like 108 or 108C, and has any experience working with like any kind of cryptography or using it in any way? You? Good. Well, that's good because this is going to give you guys a good little introduction to cryptography. This is not like super in depth. This is just sort of like the bare minimum to like understand like a lot of these common tools that we use in building and doing these competitions when we're designing secure protocols. And again, if you have any questions at any time, just raise your hand. Okay. So just an introduction to cryptography. So what is cryptography? Cryptography in the general sense just refers to like using math or algorithms to secure data. That's pretty much the fundamental of what cryptography is for, especially when it comes to communications on a network. It's a very common use for cryptography. So some of the common uses for cryptography is like confidentiality of data. So being able to have some data that is basically unreadable to anyone except some recipient, some like intended recipient of data. right? So you can think of it as like mailing a letter to someone, but making it so that only they can read it, right? So no one else can intercept the mail and like read and see what it says. Some examples of tools for doing that is symmetric and asymmetric encryption, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Another common use of cryptography is integrity. So making sure that data was not tampered with in any state, whether it was not tampered with like on your hard drive, make sure it's not corrupted, or whether it's not tampered with in transit over a network, right? So if you, again, mail a letter to somebody, you want to make sure that someone didn't like use whiteout and change the letters in the mail, because that would change the meaning of the letter, right? So common uses of, or common tools for doing this is checksums, hash functions, and digital signatures. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the last thing that is very common use case for cryptography is authenticity of data. So being able to verify who created some data, who sent you that mail, where, and like making sure that it's the person who you think it is that's sending it to you. It's not some other person who's trying to impersonate the person that sent it to you. Common uses for this, common tools for this, Max, which we'll talk about in a second, and digital signatures. So probably one of the most important thing to understand in cryptography is confidentiality, and more specifically encryption. It's one of the most important tools we have in cryptography. And encryption specifically refers to a method of garbling up data and making it unreadable to everyone except to someone else who you intend to be able to read it. And this is typically done by using a key, a secret key that is shared between two parties. And this key allows this algorithm to deterministically scramble the data up in such a way that anyone else who looks at that data will not be able to make any sense out of it. They won't be able to reverse it or do anything with it. It just looks like garbage to them. But to anyone else who has the secret key, they can then take that data and reverse it back into something that's actually meaningful. And there are two different kinds of encryption that are used today. Symmetric encryption is like the traditional way of doing encryption, where a single key is used to take up some data, garble it into nonsense, and then you can use that same key to degarble it back into something meaningful. Asymmetric encryption is a little different, where we have two different keys, one that is used to encrypt or garble the data, and then a separate key that is used to actually reverse it back into something meaningful. And we'll talk about why these are important. There's an important use for both of these later. Okay, so symmetric encryption. This is probably one of the most important forms of encryption you should be aware of, because it's what is used for any kind of like bulk encryption. So any kind of encryption on network, right? Encrypting any kind of network connections, all done through symmetric encryption. So symmetric encryption, as I said before, takes a single key, usually a random string of bytes that is generated, and then can use that same key to encrypt and or decrypt a message. So the properties of symmetric encryption, it's usually pretty fast. Modern CPUs also have lots of like built-in hardware acceleration for it. So these algorithms are usually pretty quick to encrypt and decrypt. They're also pretty easy to deploy and use in code because it's just a single key. You usually just call a single function that takes in a key and some data, and it produces the encrypted output, and vice versa for decryption. The actual implementations of these algorithms in code are also generally not super complicated compared to like asymmetric algorithms, although this does depend on the algorithm that you're using. Some common algorithms you may have heard of before is AES. This is the standard that pretty much everyone uses for encryption these days. There's also ChaCha20, which is another alternative that is also very secure and very fast, sometimes even faster than AES. Blowfish is an older encryption algorithm that was used a long time ago. It's still used today, though, in some cases. But AES and ChaCha20 are pretty much the standard ones today. Asymmetric encryption. So this is a bit different from symmetric encryption, although it kind of achieves the same thing. It's used for different purposes now. In asymmetric encryption, instead of having just one key that is used to decrypt and encrypt, you have two keys, one that encrypts, one that decrypts. And the encryption key is often called the public key because this key is usually shared publicly, because it doesn't matter if other people have access to this key because it only lets them decrypt or encrypt data, right? So it lets them protect some data, but they can't decrypt it or reverse it. So this allows other people to encrypt messages using your public key. And then the decryption key is usually kept private and is usually called a private key, is used to decrypt messages. So a typical use for this is you can release your public key to the world, and people can use your public key to encrypt a message and send it to you, and then only you can decrypt it, right? So it allows for like secure communications. This is a very important concept in cryptography. And this is an essential tool in designing any kind of secure network communications. Some properties of asymmetric encryption is that it's usually slower. So most algorithms that do asymmetric encryption are usually not as performant because they're usually just more complicated. The math behind it is usually more complicated. Although modern CPUs do still have accelerators for it. Some common are also some things about asymmetric encryption is that it's also usually limited in its ability to be used. So symmetric encryption on one hand can be used to encrypt pretty much any amount of data you want. So you can use a symmetric encryption algorithm like AES to encrypt like terabytes worth of data with the same key. In asymmetric algorithms, usually you cannot do this. They usually only have the ability to encrypt like up to like a few kilobytes at most, or maybe even a few hundred bytes. This is because of the way the algorithms are designed, the way they're put together. They're not really meant for bulk encryption. So they're typically used for establishing a symmetric key between two peers. So if you have two people on a network who want to encrypt data between each other, they will use asymmetric encryption to share a secret value between each other, right? So one person will use the other person's encryption key to encrypt a secret value, send it to them. They will decrypt it, and then they will both use that secret key as symmetric encryption. This is typically how asymmetric encryption is deployed in most modern day communications. So it's a bit of a difference compared to symmetric encryption. Some common algorithms, you've probably heard of RSA. It's a very common algorithm. It's very old. It's been around for, I want to say like 50, 40 years at this point. It's not the most secure option. It's definitely not the fastest option, but it is something that still exists and is still considered secure enough for most use cases. We also have Diffie-Hellman, and more specifically, the modern alternative, which is elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, eCTF. That is what we would probably end up using if we need this kind of asymmetric encryption. There's also ECIS, which is just another alternative, not very commonly used. So integrity. So again, one of the things I talked about when it comes to cryptography, another use of it is integrity, being able to make sure that some data was not corrupted or tampered with in any way. There are many ways of achieving integrity, but the most common one and most ways of achieving it involve hash functions. How many of you are already familiar with hash functions? If you've heard of them before? Yeah. Hash functions are useful in a lot of scenarios, not even in just secure protocols, but a lot of times you'll use them for, just basic checksums and making sure that some data wasn't corrupted on your hard drive and whatnot. What a hash function is it's a function that takes in some data, doesn't matter how much data usually, it just takes in some data and it produces a unique fingerprint for that data that's usually fixed in length. So it basically generates an ID, a unique ID for any amount of data you want, right? So you can pass it a string like hello, or you can pass it a file that's 1 gigabyte in size. It will give you a unique 32-byte ID for that file or for that data. Another interesting thing about hash functions is that they're irreversible in the sense that they are one-way functions. They take some data, produce an ID, but there's no way to take that ID and then reverse it back into the original data. And if you think about it, that wouldn't even make sense, because if you took a gigabyte file and then generated a 32-byte hash for it, there'd be no way to get 1 gigabyte worth of data back from 32 bytes. So these functions are destructive in a sense. They don't, it's not like encryption where it like preserves the original data and allows you to decode it. These are one-way functions. They're just used for generating unique IDs. And hash functions, unfortunately, are not perfect. Mathematically, in theory, all hash functions can have a chance to produce the same ID for two different pieces of data. This is called a hash collision. And this is very bad. This makes the algorithm basically unusable. If any hash function ever has collisions found for it, it renders that hash algorithm practically no longer usable. It's considered no longer secure at that point. The reason why modern hash functions have not had any collisions found for them yet is because the hashes are there's an incomprehensible amount of possible hashes. There's more possible hashes than there are stars in the entire universe. It's very hard for that to ever happen. Not impossible, non-zero, but very unlikely. Modern secure hash functions have yet to have any collisions found yet. So modern algorithms like SHA-2 that have been around for almost 20 years, 25 years at this point, have yet to have any collisions discovered. So some common algorithms, as I just mentioned, SHA is probably one of the most widely used ones. You've probably heard of SHA or SHA-2, SHA-3. SHA is like a whole family of algorithms. These are standardized by a government organization called NIST. MD5 is an old hash algorithm that a lot of people used to use, but is insecure because collisions were found for it, and it's actually very easy to find collisions for it now. Blake is another really good alternative that is used today. It's like SHA, it provides a lot of the same security guarantees, but it's a lot faster. So we actually often use Blake. In last year's design, we actually used Blake 3 because of how fast it was, while also providing some of the best SHA like hash security that we have. And you can see there's an example here in this little table of what hashing looks like. So if we pass in the string, my name is Tony or Toby, it gives us this hash over here, this long hash. But you'll notice that if we just change one character in the message, my name is Tony instead of Toby, the hash is completely different. There's like almost nothing similar about these two hashes. That's another property of hash functions, is that they are not easily deterministic in the sense that you cannot, one hash is not going to look the same as another one just because you change the input by like one little bit, right? If you change one little part of the input data, the hash is completely different. That's a completely new, unique ID. This is what makes hashes functions very useful as a checksum or as a way to verify integrity, because it allows us to basically guarantee that two pieces of data are definitely the same if they have the same exact hash, because two different data pieces, even if they're slightly different, will not produce anywhere near the same hash. And this is just an example of how hash functions can be used to verify integrity on some data. So say, for example, we're on a network, you have a sender and a recipient, right? And the sender wants to send a message like hello to the recipient. The sender will compute this hash for that message, will include it with the message itself, send both to the recipient. The recipient can then hash the data themselves and then compare the two hashes, the one they received and the one that they generated. If they don't match, then the data was tampered with or something happened. The network got corrupted or something like that. The data doesn't match anymore. If they do match, then they can be reasonably confident that the data is correct and has not been messed with. So again, this is a very important use of hash functions in any kind of secure protocol, and not even necessarily secure, but even just reliable protocols. Having this way of verifying integrity of data is very important. Authenticity. So this is the last very important thing in cryptography that we use cryptography for. This is probably one of the most important things in like any kind of secure network communication. So not necessarily with stuff like on your hard drive, but if you're talking over a network, you really want to be able to authenticate people and make sure that they are who they say they are, because you don't want to be accepting commands from a hacker, somebody who's impersonating someone else, right? So authenticity and having a way to prove that someone is who they say they are is very important. So there are a couple of methods of doing this. The one we'll talk about right now is called message authentication codes. So message authentication codes, also known as MACs for short, typically work by using hash functions in junction with some kind of secret shared key. So it's kind of like symmetric encryption. There's usually a shared secret key between two parties. And a simple but technically insecure MAC implementation would be to take some data that you want to send. You want to append that secret key that only you and the other person know to it. You hash those two things together, and then you send the hash with the data to the person. They can do the exact same thing on their end, and they should get the same hash that you also produced when you sent them the message. If those hashes don't match, then the message is not authenticated. The way this works, the reason this can work is because the recipient knows that you're the only one with that secret key, right? So they know that if you're able to produce that hash, you must have the secret key, and therefore I can trust that you are who you say you are. MACs are not super secure in some aspects, but that is kind of the essential idea of what authentication does in cryptography, is we're basically just proving that somebody has some secret value, but we don't actually need to like have them send that secret value to us to verify that they have it. They can have it by doing something like this, where they hash it, and then again, because hash functions are irreversible, somebody who has that hash cannot get that secret value back from that hash function value. So message authentication codes do provide, they provide actually both integrity and authenticity in this case, because it not only provides a hash of the data as like a form of checksum, but they also include that secret value. Some common algorithms you will see, you'll see other teams using in this competition is HMAC is the most popular one. CMAC is sometimes used, but not very frequently. HMAC is definitely the most common one. You will see that a lot from other teams. And HMAC is just hash-based. It's basically doing similar to what I just described. It's a little more complicated than that, but for the most part, HMAC is just a hash-based system with a secret key. Digital signatures. So this is probably the last tool that that's very important for you to be familiar with. This is probably one of the most useful things in cryptography that we have today, besides encryption. Digital signature algorithms are a way for you to sign some data, basically prove that you are the one who created the data, you're signing that data, providing other people with a way to verify that you are the one who you have the private key and you're able to sign some data and prove that you either created it or you authorize that data in some way. So digital signatures typically use a similar key setup as asymmetric encryption, where you have two keys, a encryption key and a decryption key, or in this case, a signing key and a verifying key. The signing key is kept secret. So this is like the private key or the decryption key in symmetric encryption. The signing key is used only by the person who owns the two keys. This key is used to sign some data as authentic, right? So you don't want this key getting out. You don't want to leak this key because anyone who has this key can sign the data, and anyone else can verify that that data is valid if they are able to sign it with that signing key. And this is actually done usually using a hash function. So typically when you sign some data, you hash it first and then you sign the hash. So that's why hash functions, again, very important to understand and be familiar with. And that resulting value from signing something will be a number usually or some kind of ID that other people who have your verifying key can then use to verify the signature. And then the verifying key is the one you release to the public. So everyone has access to your verifying key. And they can then take any data that you send with any kind of signature, and they can use that verifying key to then perform a verification check. And that verification check will verify if that signature matches the data. So if that signature is able to be produced using that data. We won't talk about the actual math behind it because it's fairly complicated, but there is, if you are interested in that, you can look up, eCDSA or RSA. They both can do this, and there's pretty interesting math behind it. Digital signature algorithms, like message authentication codes, provide both integrity and authenticity, and they're also generally preferred over message authentication codes, just because they don't require a shared secret. So you don't have to share a single secret value. You have, private and public keys, which allows better exchange of secure. You can exchange keys publicly without having to worry about secure transmission. And they are more computationally intensive. So most algorithms for digital signatures are slower. They use more CPU power, and they generally are just slower to work with. They usually take more memory as well, but they usually have better security. And most modern CPUs have accelerators. They have built-in instructions for doing these algorithms more efficiently. Common algorithms you've probably heard of, RSA, again, can be used for digital signatures, or eCTSA is the more modern alternative. Most modern cryptography, most modern secure systems use eCTSA as the signature algorithm. That's what we will be using in this competition if we need digital signatures, which we will probably will. So before we get to that, does anyone have any questions on cryptography? I know that was kind of a lot in a short period. I'm going to check the Zoom really quick to make sure. Okay. Any questions about cryptography before we move on? Okay. In that case, what we'll do now is we're just going to kind of go over kind of last year's competition a little bit. First, we'll talk about just a little bit about code policy in terms of when you're writing code and submitting it to our repositories, which we'll do right now. Also regarding code auditing. So when it comes to writing code for this competition, the code we're writing is very often security critical. That means that code needs to be audited before we just submit, right? Because we want to make sure our design is correct and that there's no flaws. So we don't want people just submitting code all over the place, not having other people read through it, verify it's correct. We want everyone to have their code viewed by at least one other person, and ideally from another sub-team. So don't have someone on your same team review your code. You want someone else from another team who's not working on the same stuff to review your code. That way that you have they can get a better idea of maybe they have a better idea of what flaws to look for because they're not biased on the code they've already been working on. So we require all code to have at least one other person to look at it. Now, if code is considered security critical, we would require at least 2 people to look at it from 2 different subteams. The reason for this, again, is security critical. First of all, security critical code refers to any kind of code that's dealing with like cryptography, secret value management, or like critical conditions, like checking if something is valid or not, or checking if a password is correct, or checking if a signature is correct. These are very important pieces of code that basically dictate whether our code works or not, right? If your secure implementation does not properly check something, and especially when it comes to cryptography, your whole design could be at stake, right? That's a huge flaw. So this kind of code needs to be very carefully checked, ideally by 2 people from 2 different subteams. And we'll see that more once we actually start developing. We'll kind of go into that more when we start actually developing. We'll start having proper like auditing sessions and whatnot. And more importantly, if you're not sure if some code is like security critical or not, if it's like not super essential, just ask someone, especially ask like anyone who's like leading a team. They will probably know. And if not, they can ask me or ask someone else. We will probably know. So it's important that you understand what code is security critical or not, just so that you don't merge any code that's like super important without having it checked first. We will also have dedicated sessions to auditing code. I will also probably have some members of the attack teams focusing on auditing some of our own code. Maybe not necessarily reading our code, but at least going through our design and making sure that there's nothing inherently flawed about it. Because that can happen where we design something, we miss some little flaw somewhere that can be exploited in some way, and we may need to add in a patch or something that can prevent any exploits in that front. So last year's, okay, is there any questions about that before we move on? Because we're going to shift over to something else now. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm just going to go over last year's competition a little bit. So I'm just going to step through sort of like the architecture of what last year's design was and also the security requirements. This is not what this year's competition is, but I'm just doing this to give you guys an example of what we're building and the kind of things we have to consider. So can everyone see this? Is that visible there? Yes, that is. Can everyone on Zoom see that?
Yes.
Okay. So last year's design was to implement a secure satellite TV network. So what this entailed was we had a satellite that was basically beaming, TV channels to the world, right? You had 2 main components to this design. There was the uplink, which was the like provider, the company that was actually broadcasting the TV frames. And then you had the receiver, which was like everyone's satellite dishes in their house or whatever. There are TVs that were actually receiving these frames, decoding it, and then showing it to the TV. So the idea here was that the uplink would send a frame, would encrypt a frame, secure it, send it, and then it would get broadcasted to everyone, and everyone's TVs would then decrypt the frame and show it on the screen. Right? Simple enough. But there's quite a few security requirements that came with this. So here are the kind of security requirements that we had. So security requirement 1 was that an attacker should not be able to decode TV frames without a decoder that has a valid active subscription. So you had to have an active subscription to that channel. So you had to be paying a monthly subscription or whatever to that channel for that to be able to view any frames from it. This means that anytime you sent a frame, broadcasted a frame, it needed to be secure, confidential using cryptography. It needed to be confidential such that only people who had valid subscriptions could actually watch that TV channel. You don't want people pirating TV, at least not that easily, right? So that was one of our requirements. So we already have one thing that means we already need encryption of some kind. Security requirement 2, the decoder should only decode valid TV frames generated by the satellite system. So authenticity, right? Making sure that the person who is sending those frames, the company that's broadcasting them, is making sure those frames are authentic. You don't want some dude like outside your house in a van broadcasting random videos to your TV. So the idea is making sure that the frames are authentic from the official source. So that means we need digital signatures or message authentication codes or something along those lines. Some form of authenticity checks. And then the third requirement just meant you cannot present frames out of order. So making sure that, video frames from the TV channels are sent and received in order. The main 2 security requirements to think about here were these first 2 here. That first one being the most challenging one to implement, surprisingly. So this is the kind of things that we're going to have. Now, this year's competition, we don't know the full details. All we know is that it's some kind of secure storage system that has like access control. So it allows like different people with different roles to access different files. So we're probably going to need encryption. We're probably going to need some kind of authenticity checks. We're probably going to need some kind of role, permission system and whatnot. So this is the kind of things to just keep in mind. On Wednesday, once we receive all the information about what we're building, we can actually start coming up with a design, looking into like the security requirements, and then coming up with a plan for how we want to actually obtain those security requirements. Now, besides the security requirements, we are also given functional requirements. These are like actual, features that we need to support on the system. So it's not just about implementing, being secure. It's about actually offering all the correct features in the correct formats, in the correct protocols, etc. There's a lot of things you have to implement correctly. So this is just an example of like, the different things we had to implement. You have to have, for example, this is like the formats of the frames that you have to follow for the TV frames, right? So this is just some examples of like the different features, so the decoders on the TVs had to be able to list all the channels that they were subscribed to. They had to be able to take a subscription update to update what subscriptions were available to that user. And then it also had to be able to decode frames and whatnot. So we're going to have to implement something just like this, where we have different components in the system, right? And this does tie back into my whole thing on subteams. So again, before, in this last year's competition, there were two main components. We had this uplink and this decoder. So those were two separate teams in our competition working on these two different components. Depending on how many components we have this year, we will likely have one team per component, maybe multiple, depending on how complicated it is. We have more people this year. We have 21 or 20 people. So we can probably break up into smaller teams and have more people working on individual parts. But we'll figure that out on Wednesday once we actually learn once we actually hear about what the full design is for this year. Are there any questions about this? Does anyone have any questions about last year's thing that design that they want to just ask about? Okay. In that case, I think that's everything I want to talk about this. And there will be on Wednesday when they release it, it'll be basically this website here. So you'll go to this website, it looks like this. They'll have all the information about, they will have all the information about the requirements and whatnot here. So as soon as they release this on Wednesday, I'm going to announce it on Discord, and then you guys can all start looking at it. I'll probably map it out, and then we'll meet sometime on Wednesday to talk about it and break up into teams. So again, just have in mind what team you want to be on. If you want to be on attack or development team, just keep it in mind, because once we get to Wednesday and we're actually ready to break into sub teams, we need to break into sub teams like as soon as possible and start organizing and getting ready to work. Ideally, we will start development within this week, by the end of this week, especially this Saturday. This next all hands meeting next Saturday will probably be our primary design meeting, where we spend the entire meeting focusing on designing or thinking about how we want to design our implementation. I think. Oh yeah, so one last thing to mention about this. When we submit our design to MITRE, they are going to test it to make sure that it functions correctly, meaning that the features and all the functional requirements are met. So if there's any bugs and it doesn't implement the features don't work properly, they won't count as a submission. We'll have to resubmit. So functional requirements have to be met. MITRE does not test for security requirements being complete. So your thing may be completely insecure and have tons of flaws. So that is all done by us. We have to be on top of that, and we are the only ones testing security. So it's very important, again, that we audit our code, we check it, we spend time testing our code a lot, making sure that it works properly against all the inputs that we can give it and whatnot. And yeah, that's basically it for that. Are there any questions? Okay. So regarding the development environment, there's two options that you will have for setting it up. You'll either be able to set it up using Nix or using Docker. So if you're not familiar with Nix at all, I would recommend Docker. It's probably the easier option. So just install Docker Desktop if you're on Windows. You can install Docker Desktop on Mac as well. If you're on Linux, you can just install Docker normally. And then if you're on Mac or Linux, you can install Nix. If you're on Windows, you can install Nix, but it's going to have to be through WSL, and I don't know how well that's going to work with the embedded devices, because you will be plugging in embedded devices into your machines and then talking to them over serial ports. I have no clue if WSL can even do that or how easy it is to set that up. So if you're on Windows, I'd say Docker is probably the easiest option. But if you're on Mac or Linux, you can use Nix or Docker, either one. Or Podman if you prefer Podman over Docker. It doesn't matter. They're effectively the same tool. So just have that installed, as soon as possible. We're not going to bother setting up development stuff right now, but in probably on Wednesday, ideally, we will have everyone set up the dev environment and have everything ready, especially on Saturday. Next Saturday, we will have everything ready to go. So make sure you have one of those tools available to you and you're able to use them reliably. Are there any other questions? We have, let's see, it is 4:05. I'll give you all like a 5-minute break, and then we're going to shift over to the hardware side of things, and Max is going to talk about, do a little hardware workshop. And again, if you have any questions in the meantime, just raise your hand, let me know. So 5-minute break, I'll give everyone. Oh, X, can we fix the audio on this? Because I don't think anyone can hear it besides me. No, we're just not going to support it. So, but it doesn't matter because this config is you only need to use it like once. Like only one person needs to use it. So we'll just leave that to Linux.
No, X, this is where you teach.
Yes.
They get conflict.
Okay.
Where are you going?
I think people can hear it.
What is the quality? Can you turn it up all the way? Max, do you want to try talking really quick just so we can make sure the audio is good?
Yo, hello, can you hear me?
Oh, wait.
Audible?
No, it's sending out the wrong thing.
Oh, damn.
Oh,
Everybody else can hear me, right?
yeah, you're good now.
Okay, good.
Your audio is good.
Yippee.
Wait, let me see if I have to request permissions.
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, we need to put your thing on the. You can hijack mine. I'm assuming it won't show both the cam and the screen share, right?
It might, I don't know.
Oh, well, turn the camera on, but.
Whatever is on this monitor is what you're gonna see on her.
Right. Yeah, I guess. I don't know where this thing is recording, by the way.
It's gonna be a local documents folder, and then since I'm signed in, you could just upload it. Wow, they put new electrical thing. Oh. Okay. Gee, let's cut all the wires. It's such a nice room. You should use this room.
It is nice, but can we reserve it every Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m.?
I think Activity provides it, so. Technically, you're not supposed to be in here on the weekends, because Slugworks is closed. For live, because, Fish. Like, fell
What?
and broke their nose.
Wow.
I don't know, I think we're running or something in the loading dock, and then they're like, oh.
Oh,
just
banned.
everyone is banned from Makerspace on the weekends.
Of course, it was Fish that.
Ducks, right? Yeah.
Also, if you guys have time at all in the next week, I'd recommend like playing around with different libraries for cryptography. Try out hash functions with Python or something and just kind of get an experience with them. Play around with them, just so you're familiar with how they work. You can ask AI. I'm sure AI can generate all kinds of random examples. So yeah, I'll upload them.
Oh, these.
ECTF, right? This is also sign. The minor sign, CCSE, right?
The UCSC two.
Now, yeah. I said two. You know, the GPU they got to drive 5 monitors.
Okay.
It's amazing.
It's like an iGPU.
No, it's like a proper workspace GPU. I got a pretty baller computer, honestly. You should look at the system specs.
Spectral.
Yeah. What? I've never seen anyone show specs.
It's an i9 14900. Isn't that the one that melts?
Um,
I think it is.
maybe.
I think it's 24
No,
cores.
that was 139.
No, I think 14th was hit too with it.
Oh,
I think they both had it.
absolutely.
That's why I like swapped to AMD because all the new generations were like messed up.
You right here.
No, I didn't. I just walked. This thing has 64 gigs of RAM. That's like gold right now.
I don't think it's DDR5. I should sell my RAM and then sell the.
Oh, actually, this probably would be DDR5 now. It's 14th gen. Go ahead, you check. Is it in system setting? It's in here, right?
Might be. I think you can just look at the memory box speed. If you go to task manager.
Oh yeah, test interface.
Uh, yeah. Looks like
Is it-
DDR5 speed.
Oh yeah, 4400.
Yeah.
That can be DDR4 now. Right? I feel like that could be. I don't know. I forget what the limits were.
That's the 36. Those cabins.
No, it's definitely more than that. Maybe not. Could have sworn it was more than that though, but maybe it's not.
Let me know when you want to start.
We're still missing a couple people, so we'll give it another couple minutes.
All right.
Is everyone back or are we missing? Okay. Is he on his way back? Oh, okay. All right, Max. You can go ahead and get started now.
You can hear me, right? Am I audible?
Yep.
All right. Um, okay, I guess we'll begin. Hi, if you don't know me or you hadn't seen me in the like fall quarter, my name is Max. I'm a fourth year electrical engineering student, and I'm going to be like focusing a lot on the hardware attack design and hardware attack hardening this year. Um, so first thing first, my hardware hacking skills are fairly elementary. I've only been really subjected to this field like for the past year or so, so it's not going to take a long time for you guys to catch up to my skill expertise. Um, I am by no means a true expert, but what I'm here today to do is to give you a sense of what hardware hacking kind of involves or entails and what it entails specifically in this competition. I will make some hardware knowledge assumptions and I will point those out when we get to them. And I'll explain those for people that don't know. But just keep that in mind that there is some hardware knowledge that is kind of a prerequisite for some of the topics here. So, first things first, the previous competitions, I looked not only at 2025, but 2024. I was only here for the 2025 competition, but the 2024 was also fairly interesting because of a lot of the information about hardware hacking came from 2024 as well. Both of these competitions, I believe, Peter, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but both of these competitions used max 78,000, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, they both did.
Okay, yeah, precisely. And the reason I know that is because some of the attacks seen in 2025 were actually based on some things found in 2024. So I looked at the top three scoring teams and I like studied like their attack analysis or attack highlights, and I found them the majority of them, as you see at the bottom here, are hardware related, except for the buffer overflow, in which case, that's just software. But yeah, the majority of the attacking capacity of each team was centered around hardware, which is the proof for why a lot of the knowledge here today is kind of important for this competition. So the current plans are as follows. For the design phase, I imagine that we're going to spend a lot of time learning about board behavior. We have to get really familiar with how the board is going to behave and what it is that we're like have available. We're going to be practicing with simulated data. Also, we're going to be practicing like with simulated code bases, just to give you a sense of like, okay, how do you look for things? How do you find and like exploit? What does that look like? Um, we're going to design attack approaches. This is just more preparation so that we spend less time thinking of it during the attack phase and we have something to really like scaffold on. And then finally, we want to develop an automated testing harness. And this goes back to kind of like what we have currently. We have only one chip whisper device, and it would be very beneficial for us to be able to like allow everybody on the team to have access to it. And the only way I can reasonably think of doing that is just giving everybody like a remote access. So we're we're thinking about working on that in this first section, first phase. So for the attack phase, I imagine that we're going to be one of the first groups, or at least people who know this. A lot of the topics here are going to be one of the first people to launch attacks. We're going to be exploring various protocols and setups that competitors are using. And then, we'll take that knowledge and, craft little attacks and responses to it. And we're going to definitely work with cryptography team members to implement new attack approaches. Some of the knowledge I'm going to talk about today involves understanding about how like AES works, at least for the elementary examples. And when you go down the line and you start attacking more sophisticated approaches, it really helps to know like how like the Choctaw cipher is working and what you can and cannot get away with. So I gotta also give you kind of a rundown of like the problems that we've had, at least for previous years. And they've all centered around, I think, two kind of points. First is infrastructure. Before this competition, we didn't have any EE lab equipment. We had only one chip whisper device that I don't think anybody really knew how to use. I mean, I would say actually that's not true. Dominic, I think, was the only one that actually knew how to do some signal analysis trace or signal analysis. But besides that, nobody had actually studied any of the glitching capacities that the device offers. And finally, we didn't really have any advisor or ECE or CSC advisor professors. Our only advisor, I think, was Cardenas, who was a cryptography advisor, in which case everybody was like, there was no way to really find out or get help when we needed it. So currently, we now have access to a facility that hosts EE equipment that we can use for this competition. Okay, so we're no longer, down bad. We got something up our sleeve. We are underway on developing alternative approaches to the chip whisperer, and I'll point these out because some other teams have also done the same thing or done this in previous competitions. And finally, our advisor, Joseph Sim, has done embedded work, although she isn't versed in cybersecurity and hardware and hardware attacking. And it's just nice to know that we have someone that it does like do embedded work. Also, Professor Marcelo Hero has offered to help out when he's available. When I talked to him about some of the things here you're going to learn today, he found it very interesting because he had told me that a lot of what he did or a lot of what we're doing here kind of mirrors a lot of what he did in industry, in which he was, debugging like CPUs and finding out where something was going wrong. And a lot of those like skills will apply to the work you're going to see here. So that's for infrastructure. In terms of team experience problems, we've had little hardware hacking experience on the team. And I kind of thought about it for a while, and I found out that there was like maybe a couple points. First things first is that the competition is fairly new and unheard of. It makes recruiting a bit hard. Every time you try to like pitch this idea or explain it to people, they always get kind of confused because, nobody really has heard of something like this before, where you're doing a lot of embedded work and you're doing the software work and cryptography work, and it makes it hard to like get people who are, I don't know, electrical or computer engineers interested in these topics. Previous years focused on recruiting software contributors to deal with turnover. As a result, you don't really get enough of that hardware experience that people can build upon. Hardware exploitation has a reputation for being difficult for new people and time consuming with a real chance of no payoff. This is like, in my experience, like the no payoff is kind of the most demoralizing thing about this entire topic is it's a lot of work and even going back to what I think as UIUC said last year, their success rate was like 0.0001% or something like that. They'd spent like months on an attack and it only worked like once. So that's something that we're going to be dealing with this quarter or this competition. There's little documentation on the subject, meaning that AI alone can only get you so far. We kind of ran into this last competition where like we were trying to do things last minute and like kind of utilizing AI to guide us. But as you will see later on, it's really hard to kind of like prompt your way through this really involved process. You end up falling into what I call or what's known as X and Y problems. You start talking about like why, like I have a problem Y, when in reality you should be talking about X. Like I'm not getting trace data from the chip whisper. Well, in reality, it's because your connection isn't to your computer is not like sound. You need to connect it, or you have to wire things differently. And AI isn't really good at pointing those problems out for you. If it isn't like written online, AI is not going to have it to really like index, and as a result, you're not going to really be able to catch yourself. Anything hardware related was triage for dealing with software problems. Again, this also goes back to the point of we're doing a lot of the hardware stuff last competition, last minute. And as a result, you don't really get the chance to, experience what it's like to actually do the attacks or go through the process and learn from it. So these are all the problems I thought of. Now, like, how do we solve it? Well, that's kind of where you come in. Okay. If I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first four of them sharpening my axe. This is from Patrick Engebretson from the Basics of Hardware and Penetration Testing. A lot of what we're going to be doing this quarter, this competition is getting good. Okay. We get good. But to get good, we have to do various things. First things first, we have to get really familiar with the board. Anybody that's going to be doing hardware work is going to be, delving deep into the data sheets, getting familiar with the protocols that we have available to us, and actually, like, starting to think about setting up like, actual tooling to guide your attacks and to guide your exploration. So we're going to have very simple tools. A lot of it is going to be very software oriented. You're going to have maybe some schematics and some PCB tools. And of course, you have the EE lab equipment. A lot of these things I imagine you're going to have to use for this competition if you want to do anything hardware related. Okay, so now with those two things done, we can move on to the actual chip whisper topics, which is like the main meat of today's like talk, I suppose. There's, I think, six different topics that we have to touch upon in order for you to actually get a sense of what the chip whisper kind of can do for us. The first group of like topics is basically the power analysis. Okay, so you have your simple power analysis, differential power analysis, and correlational power analysis in increasing what I would say complexity. And we'll get to that in a bit. You also have your glitching capacities or capabilities that the chip whisperer offers us. Um, we have clock glitching and voltage glitching. And finally, this is also kind of should be noted that we have pre-processing techniques. In order to actually do power analysis, it relies on the data being kind of prepared and aligned in order for you to actually go ahead and like, scrutinize and uh, examine the actual like cryptographic functions in the power trace. So you have to also get familiar with these techniques if you want to actually go ahead and do any of this power analysis here. But for glitching, you should be fine. Like you don't need any of the techniques. Okay. So first things first, I'm going to start with a simple password example. Okay, very, very simple. We're going to be working with, I think, AES in this one. Okay. So this is an example of some C code. Okay. We have something in the beginning before this trigger high function call. This could be anything. It could be the microcontroller doing some, I don't know, random computations, doing some random IO. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what's in between this trigger high and trigger low. Okay. What we want is we want pass bad to be 0 after it goes through this for loop, which will compare the correct password to the password that we have sent here in the myRead function. Okay, if our password is incorrect, pass bad will be 1, and the rest of the code will handle our incorrect password accordingly. Okay, so I have this trigger high function here highlighted because it's really important. It's kind of how like we orient ourselves in our code. As you can imagine, in large code bases, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code and thousands of execution and operations. So as a result, we need to be able to find our footing in the code. And that's what this trigger high does. In reality, we can find something kind of similar to this IRL because chances are they're not going to have this like just laying around in their code. Okay. Other teams, I believe, are smarter than that. So something more familiar or something more realistic would be like GPIO pins, like, I don't know, sending out data. Maybe you have some UART line. Maybe you have LEDs going high and, display and pointing to like the beginning of the operation of the code. Maybe you have some like abnormally high power draw. It could be anything like this. The only thing we really care about is having this trigger to be able to orient ourselves to the beginning of this for loop. Okay. So now that we're at the beginning of this for loop, actually, yeah, sorry. I should also mention that this random character, the data that I'm going to be passing through this code example is basically going to comprise of just a random series of passwords in which I'm just going to supply a random character plus a null byte. Okay, so there's going to be just 2 bytes here, the character, an ASCII, and this null byte. When I pass this data into this code, into this loop, and I measure the power draw between the trigger high and the trigger low functions, I get traces that look like this. Okay. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll be able to see that there is basically like a legend that indicates like what byte of the, or yeah, what character in the password was sent to the microcontroller to do the decryption. So what sticks out to you, right? I mean, sometimes in this case, it might be a bit more obvious, but in reality, you might have longer traces. This was only going on for 70 microseconds. You could go on for, I don't know, thousands of microseconds. So it might be kind of hard to see what is sticking out. So I can make it kind of easier. What I'll do is I'll take like a reference trace in which I know the password is incorrect. And the way I do that is I send a single null bytes to the microcontroller and I measure that power or the power trace. And then I take that power trace and I subtract it from all feasible power traces or all collected power traces, I should say. And as a result, you get kind of this graph. In this graph, you can see quite clearly that one of these traces is abnormally different than the others, right? And it's this gray trace. This gray trace corresponds to the H character, in which now I know that according to this like specification, according to this encryption approach, that the first byte of the password is H because it's the only byte that has deviated from all the failed byte or all the failed or common routes taken by the other bytes. Okay. So that's basically the gist of SPA or simple power analysis. We are concerned with simple differences. It could be anything from trace timing and delay of the traces or differences in trace shape. SPA is kind of like the simplest way to really do power analysis on the Chip Whisperer. Uh, but because it's so simple, there's some things that it's lacking, and there are other approaches that actually give us more leeway and more options when it comes to attacking. But for the time being, SPA is sometimes going to be the best thing to kind of go forth with when you first start looking at the traces. Okay. Now, the beautiful thing about SPA is it's very simple. Once you kind of have the understanding of like what the traces are going to look like here, you can kind of automate the attacks. And as a result, you can kind of like have a Python script that iterates through each character, finds the one that's abnormally high, which we had said is H, stores that, and begins continuing down the next series of characters to test. And we go through this entire process over and over and over again, finding each successive correct byte until at the very end, we have our password. So yeah, this is the beauty of SPA. Very simple, can get you into, can help break very simple encryption schemes. Um, Other than that, not much you can do. I mean, so this section of the talk comes from, I think, what somebody asked in Discord the other day, which is like, what's the point of going through all this like power analysis or techniques and capacities that the chip whisperer has? Like, why can't we just glitch it? I mean, just glitch it, get it over with. Don't do this whole hassle or don't go through the hassle of having to find the key. Just find a way to bypass the check and you should be fine, right? Well, this snippet of code comes directly after the previous snippet of C code that I showed, in which case we have like, in the current instance, we have just a simple F statement that checks for pass bad. If pass bad is 1, we go to the erroneous path. If it's 0, we go through the actual correct path, right? We want to be in this correct path here. This is where we ideally would like get access to maybe some special secrets that we would otherwise not have access to. Um, but the problem is that this kind of thwarts glitching attacks, and it might not be obvious, right? Like, how does it do that? Well, in order to understand, you actually have to look at the assembly output of this code. So right here, I have this if statement that's kind of like referencing where we are in the code. Now, I'm going to ask you kind of a question. Going back to or thinking of this if statement, what instruction here do I need to trip in order to get to LED OK down here? Okay. Assuming that I have an incorrect password, assuming that this is 1, and we go down this series of operations, which instruction do I attack here? Any ideas?
You can raise your hand and I can relay it.
Okay, so in this instance, we can try skipping this instruction. Now, the thing about this implementation is that as we're going down this series of code or going down the series of operations, we're going to hit this LED error one, and then we're going to hit all the rest of the code or the instructions that come right after it. And the only instruction that really matters is this BLX instruction, or operand, I should say, or operator, sorry. This BLX operator, which is what's going to get us to jump out of this loop. So as a result, we kind of want to get like glitch this specific instruction. The problem is there's possibly too many clock cycles from the beginning of the loop, right? In this instance, it's kind of simple. There's maybe like one simple for loop, but in reality, you could have, delays, randomized timing delays. You could have a lot of other computation going in the middle. This makes, finding this specific instruction very, very difficult. Um, So I thought about it, and I thought originally that this was kind of like, impossible. You couldn't, or theoretically impossible. If they actually went through the hassle of hardening this for loop and making it much more difficult to time the point of this instruction, then you wouldn't be able to get to it. But then I thought about it some more and I realized that there's a different approach here. Instead of starting from, let's say, hypothetically, this trigger low and scanning forward to this particular instruction, what I can do instead is place my trigger at this LED, right? When this LED errors out, there's going to be a signal that the microcontroller is going to send to the LED that I can use as a trigger. And now that I have that trigger, I can now begin orienting myself much more closely to this BLX instruction and glitching it. Um, right? What if LED was, or what if it wasn't LED error one, but a return statement? In which case, this thing kind of all breaks down. You can't really get around the return statement or get around some other function call that jumps out of the current function, right? Power analysis can reach easily where glitching can't at times. And that's kind of what I want to showcase here is sometimes glitching doesn't really work as well as power analysis can. So going forward with that observation, I'm not going to like introduce DPA. Oh, and before I kind of go forth with that, does anyone have questions on SPA that I can clarify before we get more complex? All right. Okay. So going into DPA, DPA is, I guess, like a step above in terms of complexity as compared to SPA. When we talk about DPA, the first thing you have to think about is differences between groups. Although this is a huge simplification from like the actual like math that's going on in the background, I think it's a good starting point for the discussion. So what we do is what we need to do is we need to find the key that is being used to encrypt plain text and that we are reading the encrypted form from the microcontroller. So we know the data that is being sent in. We don't know the key, but we also know the data that's coming out. Now, if we know what's going in and we know what's coming out, what we need to do is figure out what the key inside is. So what we can do is we basically guess sections of the key, okay? And when we guess the sections of the key, what we'll do is we'll pipe a input byte using our guessed key. It'll produce for us an output. The output we can use to, measure basically the power draw of the specific key guess. As a result, what we can do with the output that we've now generated, the output text that we've now generated, is basically start categorizing all the traces we have into two groups. One group is basically the instance where the key is on, or a specific byte of the output is on, and one group is like the instance where a specific byte of the output text is off. Okay. Or sorry, I shouldn't say byte, it's bit. Sorry, my bad. It's going to be the difference between um, the a specific byte in the text output being on and a specific bit in the text output being off. Okay. When this is the case, when we have the correct key, the difference of the average of the on results and off results will be high for the correct key. So this is kind of what it looks like in practical reality. This red trace right here corresponds to the correct byte of the key. Now, currently, we're only examining a single byte of the key and guessing it correctly. In reality, we need to actually go ahead and guess all the bytes of the key in order to recover the full key, in which case all the correct traces would look something like this. This blue trace corresponds to this red trace right here, and every subsequent trace, as outlined in the legend on the right-hand side, is indicated by the actual like correct key byte number. So this is like the first byte, the second byte, the third byte, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as you see, when we have the correct byte guessed, the DPA analysis gives us basically this highlight of the instances where the key was correct. And now we can start, now we can basically take this information and recover the correct key. So that's basically the gist behind DPA. We take the difference between on and off. We average these specific groups. We take the difference of this average of these average groups, and it'll give us these traces that basically point out to us the key. Okay. So now that we've kind of seen what DPA is, at least a very high level view of it, I'm going to move on to CPA. correlational power analysis. But before I can get there, I kind of have to point something out that I mentioned kind of in passing beforehand, which was power draw. I said that the text output, depending on, the specific key, will draw more power, right? More bits will be on, in which case more power is going to be drawn. When we're talking about something like this, we're really referring to a concept called Hamming weights. Um, Basically, the idea is you take a byte and you count the number of ones in that byte. Okay. The more ones there are, the more power you require to handle the data. Now, it might not be kind of obvious why this is important, but as we get into CPA, you'll see that this is actually a very important concept when it comes to actual like power analysis. So correlational power analysis, basically the gist is strikes again. Okay. So I don't know if any of you have taken any like statistics course or any sort of probability course, but the basic gist of this power analysis centers around Pearson's coefficient formula, in which case what we are doing is we're trying to analyze uh, the correlation between X and Y. Okay. So what we do here is we get the output byte by applying a known power trace plaintext byte to an encryption algorithm with a key byte guess. Okay? Basically the same gist of what we did with DPA. Then what we do is we find the correlation between the key byte guess output Hamming weight and the power trace, or the power traces associated with those output Hamming weights. So the idea here is that higher Hamming weights results should lead to more power draw in the trace. Do you see that correlation? As the output of the encryption it has a higher Hamming weight number, the power trace theoretically should be drawing or demonstrating a draw of higher power. Likewise, if the Hamming weight is a very low number, in which case most of it is zero, the power trace should also simultaneously be a very low or demonstrate a very low power draw. Okay. The correct key byte guess will yield the highest absolute correlation between these two data sets, between the data set of the Hamming weights and the data set of the power traces that you collect. Okay. In which case, it'll kind of look something like this. It's kind of inverted at the time, at this current moment, because just the way the math works out, the correlation kind of inverts. And the reason why that is because when you see a power trace going down, in reality, what's happening in the background is you're drawing more current. So that kind of messes with the math. But for the time being, just understand that these distinct traces are pointing out the highest correlation between our guess or between the Hamming weights and our power traces that makes it distinguished from the other traces or from the other bytes. Other traces, I should say, sorry. And like now we have all basically 16 bytes here. Once we know the byte that we've used to guess and produce the correlation traces, again, we can reconstruct the key. That's the basic gist of CPA. Now, there's an instance like since we're doing a lot of math, there's a chance that we can actually recover the wrong key, right? It's possible. I mean, we could. This is kind of a graph that demonstrates actually that point. As we have fewer traces, you can see that these lines are very high. What these lines correspond to is something called guessing entropy. Basically, this is demonstrating the amount of possible bytes that are, or I would just, yeah, the amount of possible bytes that are feasible, right? And as a result, it kind of basically corresponds to the amount of error that we're going to have in our results. The more possible bytes we have for the correlation, the less likely we are going to get the correct byte. But as we increase the number of traces we collect, everything really like quickly drops down, and we can be comfortable, or we can comfortably know that the key that we're able to recover is actually kind of sound. Okay. Yeah, that's basically the gist. The more traces we collect, the less likely we will be wrong. Okay. Again, the attacks are automatable. Going to lab 4.3. You can kind of see the gist of here, or the gist of this here. You have a lot of traces. You're sending in data. You get out data. You have this key, but you don't know what the key is. You have the actual power trace demonstrated here. And then you take all this data, you process it, and you're able to, in essence, predict the correct key bytes or the correct sequence of keys or bytes. And again, automatable, you can do this in background while you're performing other attacks, but that's kind of the beauty of CPA is where DPA and SPA may fail, CPA may uncover some useful information. Okay. I mentioned this earlier, like there are things called pre-processing techniques. Um, SPA, DPA, and CPA all require traces to be aligned. So what happens is you'll see a lot of jitter every time you try to record power traces. Again, there might be some, or other teams might kind of thwart your ability to measure power traces by like adding random delay or increasing the amount of computation being performed, which leads you kind of astray. So as a result, we have kind of these techniques to combat that. The first and kind of simplest technique is called the sum of absolute differences. Basically, what we do is we find a specific window in the trace that is unique and we align all traces to that specific window. Okay, you have to find like the section of the trace that is unique. Otherwise, all the traces will become jumbled. Okay, that's the gist of SAD. Dynamic time warping. This is more of like a, I think more of an exotic process or pre-processing approach in which it's really helpful for dealing with like randomized delay, which you will see sometimes in other teams' code bases, in which they add like this, random delay where you're waiting like a couple milliseconds and then you're not waiting a couple milliseconds and then you're waiting like 10 milliseconds. And in which case, a lot of that data becomes like, spaced out and it becomes very difficult to actually align everything together. So what we can do is we can mathematically basically warp time such that all the interesting data that we want to analyze is actually aligned to like a single spots in time, which then allows us to perform the rest of the techniques. So when it comes to like dealing with randomized timing and randomized delay, dynamic time warping is what you're going to be looking at. And finally, windowing. So especially with CPA, it's CPA is oriented around like correlation and significant correlation. When you have a lot of data that is basically not relevant, it really messes with those correlation calculations. So as a result, you kind of want to like cut down on the amount of data that you're going to be analyzing at the present moment and getting to what like the actual important information is, and the actual important encryption power traces are. Um, so that concludes like power analysis. Okay. And before I move on, are there any questions on what I've talked about so far? All right.
Um,
So, oh, sorry. Is there
Actually, I
something?
don't think I have any questions.
Okay, gotcha. So now we're going to move on to like, something more, I think, something I'm personally more familiar with. Everything beforehand is kind of dealing with a lot of math and a lot of statistics and probability and understanding the actual like encryption of what you're trying to attack. Um, we now are going to move on to glitching, which I think is way more of my wheelhouse, and I think, kind of attest to. So, when it comes to glitching, the gist is that you're trying to insert a clock edge into the microcontroller at a specific time. Okay, this will thwart the current code execution so we can skip single instructions. You have to analyze assembly outputs to pinpoint attack locations to reduce the attack time, multiple attempts. That point about multiple attempts refers to the fact that in the chip whisper, you're actually given the ability to customize and increase the number of locations you want to attack at once, which means you can, in essence, like glitch multiple times at any one instance that can might help you bypass like multiple checks. The thing is as you're adding multiple attempts, it becomes way more problematic and there's more and jitter becomes more issue and it throws off your glitching attempt. But it is feasible. And the only way you can actually kind of do this reasonably is if you analyze the assembly output and, pinpoint those specific instructions that you want to skip. Okay. So if any of you have taken any sort of like EC or CSE or EC class that's giving you like a chance to look at like signal output and like signal waveforms, basically the gist here is, in this case at least, we're given like an input clock, we want to glitch, and as a result of the glitch we introduce into the clock, we get this kind of clock XOR. This clock XOR is beneficial for us because now we have this new clock edge or basically these new two clock edges that are not long enough or not as long as the previous input clock was. This is what allows us to do the skipping of instructions. Now, there are two ways to go about this. There's the first way, which is clock glitching, which is the most reliable glitching method. Basically, the gist is you hijack the clock of your target and supply your own clock that you trip as you please. You have all the control here. Basically, you have all the cards and you can manipulate it as you want. You can speed up the clock, you can slow down the clock, you can insert glitches or insert glitches anywhere you want, and the chip whisperer will do all of that for you. The problem is what happens if the clock is inside the chip? There is no way to otherwise get in yet. Now that yet is referring to another approach called the LFI, laser fault injection. In that kind of approach, you're basically cutting open the die and you're shining a laser at a specific trace line to inject this clock edge. Um, Currently, we do not have a way of doing it like as of this moment, but it's something that we're really interested in doing in the future. Okay, moving on from clock glitching, we have voltage glitching, which is basically the more general method. It's, I think, more likely, or it's going to be the thing that you're more likely going to use when you start working in hardware or hardware attacking. The gist of this is that you're basically trying to jolt the supply rail with enough voltage to trip the entire chip. So basically, you can think of it as a defibrillator. Okay, you're trying to like interrogate a person, and if you have them explain back to you their entire story, and if you ever feel like they're trying to lie to you, you jolt them with voltage, and as a result, they might trip up and they might give up a secret. Um, the problem with this approach, however, is that it requires multiple attempts to get right, and it has a lower chance of success because, as you can imagine, with actually like interrogating a person this way, it's very heavy-handed and it can do a lot of damage, and you can jumble up data in the background that you actually might be interested in retrieving. Okay, so like using a defibrillator, we actually have to prepare the patient. In this case, I actually pulled out the old schematic from last year's competition, which was the Max 78,000 featherboard. So right here, this is actually the Max 78,000. Okay. So currently, I have highlighted these specific nodes. These specific nodes are basically all of vCore A. Now, this attack wasn't my own design, sadly. It was attack that I learned from SigPony, from UUIUC, and I read some of their documentation. I did some snooping around, and I found out that they figured out how to do this. Basically, in order to voltage glitch the Max 78,000, you need to inject voltage at this specific trace at the specific node. But the problem is that you have these capacitors. These capacitors are known as decoupling capacitors, and their whole point and their whole the point of them being there is that they maintain the voltage level of vCore A. So in order to voltage glitch properly, you actually have to remove them. Easier said than done, right? This is the back of the Max 78,000 featherboard, right? So before we were looking at C55, C53, C17, C89. We have C20, right? All connected to vCore A, the trace or the node that we want to glitch. Like now we actually have to go through the process of finding them. So like, can you see these capacitors at all? I mean, yeah. Like anybody see the capacitors? So in this instance, the capacitors, you'll find C53 here, C55 here, and C20 here. C17 and C9, I believe, are on the other side of the board. But again, the problem with removing these decoupling capacitors is now you're introducing the possibility of more noise propagating in that line. So now it becomes a question of how many capacitors do you remove? How much noise do you introduce to give you the ability to actually glitch properly? Um, like a lot of all that knowledge, you actually have to experimentally verify. This just kind of goes back to the whole notion of hardware hacking being kind of difficult and time consuming. But this is just to give you a sense of like what it involves here, like physically. Like you have these capacitors, you have to remove them. Where are they? Okay, how do you remove them? You remove them. What's going to happen to your board? So now that I've gone through the whole gist of the whole points, I should say, of voltage glitching and clock glitching, now we have to actually, perform the glitch. Now we have to prepare the device. We have now prepared the device, assuming that we've removed the bypass capacitors, but like now we actually have to perform a successful glitch. In this case, I'm kind of gonna assume that we're working with voltage glitching because clock glitching is way more simple. Voltage glitching, again, might be more realistic for what we're gonna be doing this quarter. Um, with that said, learning the software controls of voltage glitching is fairly straightforward. So I forked the basically new or the owners of the Chip Whisperer had the repository that was filled with the firmware and the courses to actually learn how to do the voltage glitching and clock glitching, as well as all the other information discussed here today. I forked it and I'm currently kind of developing the courses in order to give you the ability to actually like experience this on your own and learn about it so that way you're more prepared when you're when the actual attacking and the actual exploitation and investigation begins. So that's like the hardware. That's when you want to actually learn about like how do you like programmatically set up Python such that you get the chip whisper working properly. The problem here now is that we kind of have to also deal with the hardware. And the hardware, however, at times you kind of just have to figure it out on your own. Like the way I learned how to do the hardware glitching, the hardware voltage glitching for the chip whisper was by actually analyzing the PCB traces of the what's it called, the target board support and one of the refer or one of the vulnerable targets that you can attack using the chip whispers like own documentation to guide me. And the reason I did this is because I there isn't like there does not exist much documentation on these attacks and on how to conduct these attacks. You kind of have to kind of like reverse engineer everything and learn like how it is everything is wired up and how it is the chip whisperer expects everything to be wired up in order to go ahead and actually send glitches out. In this instance, I figured out that the two SMA ports at the top of the target port were actually connected to the same trace, which now made it clear that not only are you measuring the voltage at the shunt resistance on the like insecure example or insecure MCU, but you're also going to be using that same trace to glitch. So when you actually go ahead and start developing your own attacks, you now can keep this in mind in which that, or you now can keep this in mind that you're glitching the same node, the same trace that you are also measuring from. Okay. And a lot of the other traces here also kind of give kind of similar revelations. Like, okay, you have this GPIO4 pin. What is that actually connected to in the MCU? This GPIO4 is very important because it's kind of what we use for triggering and like orienting ourselves in our code, like I mentioned before. So when you actually go ahead and set up your attacks, you're going to have to think about, okay, what is this GPIO4 going to be in for or be in my microcontroller in my example. So this actually goes back to something I was doing for the courses. I wanted to actually verify and like demonstrate how it is that you kind of verify that the code is behaving kind of like how you expect. So if you look at like the courses at SCA 101 6_4, they give you this image, which is basically a UART communication. You have your GPIO, which is your trigger point, and it's pointing you to the specific location in the power trace. They give you this image, but they don't really give you the ability to learn how to figure it out. So in this instance, like I guess the best approach that I figured out or I came up with is to actually just like verify that this is exactly what's happening. Because the last thing you want to do is go through the process and go through all the examples and set up all your Python code, only to figure out that something about the UART implementation was done incorrectly. So to do that, what I did is I set up the chip whisper, I set up the target board, I attached my oscilloscope probes, and I basically confirmed that the chip whisper, or sorry, I basically confirmed that the target MCU is performing UART communication, is performing an encryption between the transmission, or yeah, between the transmission and the response of UART, which is kind of evident in this power trace right here that deviates from other uh, sections of the power or of the power trace. Now that this power trace is deviating, going back to what we were talking about before with power analysis, you can actually take this power trace, capture it with the chip whisperer, and begin analyzing it and begin processing it and begin attacking it with power analysis techniques that I talked about today. So this is like we're now like preparing to actually like attack it and confirm that we are attacking what we want to attack, which is also a point that needs to get pointed out in terms, or I should say rather, that this highlights that when it comes to hardware hacking, it's really helpful to confirm your work with an oscilloscope. If you don't have any oscilloscope experience, um, feel free to reach out. We'll kind of train you and teach you. This is, I think, invaluable when it comes to using the chip whisperer, because otherwise you're going to be completely lost. Your data might get communicated improperly or differently than you expected. A lot of your work might go nowhere. Having an oscilloscope to just back up what you're seeing is a really good start when it comes to actually going ahead and doing the rest of the attacks. Okay. So when it comes to the attacks, there are basically four main variables that we use to define them. There's the first variable, which is ext offset, which specifies the specific clock period or cycle from the trigger point. So basically, we're scanning the entire section of the clock. We're going through subsequent clock periods. ext offset is going to control which clock you're trying to attack. Offset specifies the location within each specific clock cycle. So whether or not you're attacking the first half, the latter half, somewhere in between, offset's what's going to control that. Width is how much of the clock period do you want to attack with the chip whisper? Like how long do you want the voltage to saturate the device? And finally, tries is how many attempts with the specified settings do you want to attempt? Um, this helps combat jittering in the results. The more tries that you get, the more tries you do, the more the more reasonably assured you are that like there is no specific like vulnerability there. The problem is as you increase or mess with each of these variables, it can increase the amount of time it takes to actually perform the attack, which is a very big concern, and which is why I talked a lot about the assembly analysis earlier. That's one way we can cut down on timing. So this is kind of an example of what you will see when you start glitching. We have width at the bottom, we have offset at the left-hand side. Everything here is basically EXT offset layered on top of each other. So we're looking like top down. And we're only like really considering the offset and the width. And you can see here that there are actually instances at the specific edges of these kind of blobs of red, of these failure points, that we have an actual success. And what this means is that we're actually bypassing some sort of check that the MCU is doing and that we've actually accomplished what we set out to do. Okay, this is kind of like an example of like a three-dimensional glitch plot. Instead of hiding the XT like range, I've actually now demonstrated it here. And this kind of makes it more clear what it is that you're trying to do or what it is your data is going to look like when you glitch. I'm actually going to pull that up right now here. It should be, yeah, glitch here. And like I took the liberty of writing this today, and you can, apologies for kind of like displaying how it looks, but you can actually kind of see like this z variable right here corresponds to your offset. This y variable corresponds to your width, and the x corresponds to your ext. And you can see that there's not much. However, there's an instance of a glitch occurring at the specific region. And now with this information, it's kind of helpful because now you can kind of refine and shrink down the area of investigation and start attacking this specific area to see if that you can maybe get more successful glitches. So with that all talked about or kind of explained and shown, I should actually stop and pause. Any questions on any of thing I kind of mentioned right now? Anything on glitching that I should explain further? Okay, so finally, I'll wrap up this talk with basically the previous year work, and I'll be kind of analyzing more specifically the hardware aspect of it. The first team that really stuck out to my mind was not CMU, which was the first place winner. It was actually SigPony. And the reason why is because that whole information about the bypass capacitors and desoldering them and removing the decoupling capacitors, I should say, that came from their work here. And you can actually see that they are attacking vCore A. I pulled this slide directly from the slide that they used to showcase their work this year. And you can see that, yeah, like we have vCore A that we're actually going to glitch. We're using the LED to trigger as our trigger point to orient ourselves. And we've set up not just the chip whisper, but we've also set up this, I think, I forgot it's the um, CW light, the chip whisper light, to also help attack boards. The more devices you have attacking, the less time it takes to actually discover any vulnerability, which is why we were interested in developing alternatives to the chip whisper this year. Okay, moving on from that, we also have ACM, which I also thought was very interesting. They overclocked their board, in which case it actually changed the way that the encryption was being handled, which this goes to show like when it comes to hardware hacking, you're not only dealing with hardware glitching and power analysis, you're also kind of dealing with the underlying encryption schemes of it all. And your work here can actually help the cryptographers on team and simplify their work and make it easier for them to actually exploit a vulnerability that competitors didn't actually take into consideration. In this other Sig Pony screenshot I took, I liked the screenshot in particular because here it kind of exemplifies the glitching that they're doing here. They have a bunch of MOSFETs, and I'm assuming that it's tied to source, in which case they're going to glitch each of these microcontrollers, and having like five of these really dramatically speeds up um, attack discovery. In addition, not only do they have this glitching apparatus set up, they also have it remotely connected and they also have it automating attacks, which is something that we are also considering doing this year. Um, yeah. And so finally, word from the wise, this is from CMU. When it comes to doing a lot of hardware attacks, it's a very good idea to think about a lot of the things that you see visually and see and deal with physically on the board. A lot of the LEDs give away information, give away positions, as you know, as I've hammered home multiple times. Having a trigger point in the code really helps you narrow down what it is that you're trying to get at, and exploit other people's applications. So finally, we wrap up with the reality. Everything discussed here requires a lot of time. It requires time to review the decompiled assembly output. It takes time to review schematics and board communication protocols. It takes time to gather trace data and perform power analysis and verify that you did it correctly. It takes time to design and verify attack approaches. And finally, it takes time to run time-intensive attacks, right? I think running this attack, I believe took me, well, this one was much lighter. This took me maybe like 12 or 30-ish minutes. But a lot of these attacks for more sophisticated implementations can easily take days, if not weeks, if not months, if you're not careful and if you mess up a lot of times. So again, very time intensive. But now with all those things explained, we kind of have like the payoffs. So what are the payoffs? The payoffs is basically that these skills are unique and they require expensive equipment to learn otherwise. You're not really going to have other opportunities to really rehearse and sharpen these skills like you will in this competition. Additionally, our contributions will be meaningful and help secure further spots on the leaderboard. A lot of the top scoring teams, as you've seen before with the hardware, with the attack spotlights that I showed at the beginning, a lot of these teams credited some of their success to hardware attacks, and it was one of the reasons why they scored so highly. So being able to develop that for our team this year, I think, is a very good thing to do for not only this competition but competition going forward. Um, because we're going to be doing a lot of analysis and doing a lot of attacking, we're not only going to be helping develop, but we're also going to be like an extra layer of review for the efforts of other teams. We're going to be able to, vet that the encryption schemes are secure. We're going to be able to vet that, there's not like a protocol leaking data or information or anything like that. Having that ability, having that extra layer of review, I think is very helpful, especially given what we learned from last year. Um, and finally, you have the chance to contribute to an entirely new section of the Slugsec eCTF attacking ability. We don't really have that many like hardware hacking people in this club or in this competition on our team, let alone in the club, let alone in the entire university. Uh, I don't know of a single person other, I guess, than Dominic, I, and maybe Rose that's actually experienced the Chip Whisperer. So your ability to help us and learn about like these tools is going to go a long way in improving our abilities here on out. So with that, thank you, and may the odds favor your attacks. Any questions before I leave?
Yeah, I had a question about the 3D graph.
You can come sit over here. I think it's set up better.
Yeah, I just had a question about the 3D graph, hoping to maybe understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So are all these just like on the same, I'm just trying to like understand it. This is like my own, like not really knowing what's going on, but it's like
Yeah.
on the same like gate. It's just like trying a bunch of different attacks at different widths, is this like at the same location in the code and then it's just like one of those combinations of variables gets through or?
Yeah, so actually I could go into that. I was hoping that somebody might point this out. So this is the actual like implementation that we're attacking with this glitching example. I'm going to highlight this specific section of C code here. This if statement is what we were trying to mess with. We have this trigger that goes high here, we have this if statement, and we basically want to have it um, so that way, like when we glitch, we mess with this if statement execution, and we trick the microcontroller into thinking that let's say I believe our password was correct. Okay. So that's kind of what we're doing high level. When it comes to actually glitching, what you see here is with each red kind of like stick, each stick is basically a series of points that we're testing, and we're testing them at specific widths, at specific offsets, at specific ext offsets, and we're trying to find like an instance where we actually get through. We're not, I don't believe we're actually sending any data. As a matter of fact, you can actually see up here. Um, yeah, we're not really sending any data. We're sending like an array of empty bytes. Like there's nothing here of importance. All we're really interested in and concerned with is bypassing that check, in which case we're basically scanning the entire area of possible glitch configurations to see if there is one that allows us to get through, which is shown right here. This green one. This green one got us through. What this means is that like that configuration right there, assuming that you do multiple tries in the future, will get you through and allow you to bypass that check, which again, maybe is important when you're actually doing more sophisticated attacks. Like now, um, I will say actually on that point that this whole development of like using a 3D graph was my idea. And the reason why I like it more than using like a normal 2D graph is because it's kind of hard to see all the data that you gathered via the glitching, right? It's all like layered on top of each other. When you do like a 3D graph or a higher order graph, you're able to get a sense of like what the actual space feels um, like what's failing, what's not failing, what's getting through, what's not getting through. And from there, you can update your like attack approach, right? Now that I know that this green or that the glitch worked here, I can now spend more time analyzing this area and glitching this area with these configurations and seeing if I can possibly get more attacks or more successful glitches and yeah, get more successful glitches. Um, as a result. And again, that helps speed up attack time. That reduces complexity because now instead of you like going through the entire spectrum of possibilities, you're localized entirely into like a reasonable space. Um, Something I should also note, the reason why it's spaced out is basically based upon like how I've specified the attack setup. You can go more granular, but again, as you go more granular, it takes more time. So again, having this successful glitch, now I can justify spending more time with more like a fine-tooth comb going through the space and seeing if there's anything else here. So yeah, when it comes to looking at this graph, just just know that all of these three dimensions are things that we're varying, and we're trying to find the space that maximizes our chance of a successful glitch here.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks. And just one follow-up question is there a reason the green dot is like an off, like a outlier from the rest of the dots? Was it just like that was happen chance, or is there a reason it's kind of away from the rest
Yes.
of?
Oh, so yeah, on that point, it's kind of hard to see. I think point this out. Each red dot here you see is an instance where the microcontroller reset itself. There are actually points above these red dots that were checked, but a lot of times they didn't actually cause the microcontroller to reset. So sometimes you might glitch and nothing might happen, and as a result, you kind of just like move on, right? And that's what's happening here. A lot of these instances of those like a lot of those attempts at glitching this specific space kind of resulted in nothing. I mean, you still have a couple red dots here, but it just so happened to be that this specific instance resulted in a green dot, right? We're checking this entire region, and it just so happened to be that this one spot stuck out.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
All right, any other questions before I close out? Okay, yeah, thank you for your time. I'm gonna pass it back to Peter. If you have any questions, DM me in Discord, or if you have any ideas or suggestions of like future workshops you want,
Uh-oh. Might have lost connection, or do not. Okay, that basically wraps up for today. We went a little bit over. So just keep in mind, Wednesday competition starts. So we're going to meet on Wednesday online likely, and we're gonna go over the specifications for this year's competition, and we'll break into sub teams. That's like the main thing to keep in mind for this week. So just have an idea of what you want to work on. If you're interested in hardware stuff, reach out to Max. Keep that in mind. Let us know when we go to that. Yeah, that actually reach out to Max now, as I would say, because you can start getting onboarded on that as soon as possible. And then other than that, does anyone have any questions about anything we talked about today? Okay. Is everyone excited for the competition? Okay. It's a pretty hard competition and it's a lot of work. So, but I think we can do good. I think we have a really sizable team. I think we got a good team here. So we'll see how it goes. On Wednesday, we will have the specifications. Then we'll basically have an emergency meeting on what we're going to be doing with those specifications. And then next Saturday is going to be our design meeting. So we're going to spend pretty much the whole time just coming up with ideas for our design. If you have any questions, just message in the channel or ping me, message any one of the leads. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for coming.